All right, here we are at Waterworks Park in Iowa City. I'm Noah Truesdell with ISWEP, and this is
Tom Rosburg, professor at Drake University.
And
Josh Worrell, Assistant Superintendent of Parks and Forestry.
And we'll be taking you around some of the parks in Iowa City today. How many acres do you oversee here in Iowa City?
In Iowa City, we oversee right around 3,000 acres of ground, 57 parks, and it could be anything from mowed turf, athletics, to native prairie, to wetlands.
Great. And how big is your staff that you work with?
So we have 23 full-time staff and 55 seasonals.
Okay. What can you tell us about the Waterworks Park?
Yeah, so Waterworks Park is roughly about 420 acres. 78 acres of it at one point was a sand and gravel quarry, and the rest of it was farmed for about 106 years is what we have for history on it. Waterworks was built in the early 2000s, and everything was planted to native prairie. So that is everything within the Waterworks area, trails and prairies, is managed by the Parks and Forestry Department.
Okay. And you were telling me a little bit ago about you have it parceled out and you're doing burns now?
Yep. So in 2020, I came from the city of Coralville, where I spent 12 previous years, and developed a burn plan for our different parcels within the city. Waterworks itself has 21 sections. Every section is burnt with about a 3 to 5 year annual renewal. We'll come back to each section and burn it. We do not burn more than 30% normally. That way we still leave habitat and we still leave food source for the remaining wildlife to adjust over to.
Okay, how has the burning been going?
The burning's been going really well, other than our crazy springs and falls and very windy weather. It kind of limits us at time, but we have a good staff. We have about a dozen staff members that are certified to burn, and some days we put in 12-hour days and we burn late or we burn early, but we try to make it happen as much as we can.
And what can you tell us about this section that we're standing in right here?
Yep, so the section we're standing in right here isn't known. We have no record of it ever being burnt from when it was planted. So this section right here, we actually put a very slow, hot fire through, because in the background you can see there's a lot of woodies that are within this area. So in this area, we tried to put a hot fire through here to limit the amount of damage that we would have to do coming in here to remove stuff. So as you can see over here to our left, we had a locust tree right here that we wanted to remove that particular tree. There's some others you can see we did not kill in here. It did not take fire very well, or took it well, but that's all right. If we can limit the amount of time we put into an area by using a tool like fire, it's better off we'll be.
Well, let's take a look at this prairie here. As Josh said, they did a burn earlier this spring, and it's really looking like it's responded well to it. The vegetative growth is pretty vigorous, lots of plants and flower. That's usually one of the responses after a fire. So this big bushy one right here in front of us, I want to say something about it. This is a species of indigo. This one is called blue indigo, Baptisia australis. There's been a little bit of, I would say probably confusion as to whether this species is native to Iowa or not. As far as we can tell, and sometimes it's hard when things get introduced really early, going back in time, but I think the general consensus is this is not native to Iowa. It is native further to our south and to our southwest. But it has a bluish flower, as you can see right here. The other two species of indigo that are native, one of them is here, and we'll take a closer look at one of those, white wild indigo. Another one that's right here in front of us in flower is this penstemon. I'll just go ahead and pluck the stem right here and hold it up so we can see a little bit better. Penstemon digitalis. This is a pretty common species in the eastern half of Iowa on prairies. And it's a good species to put into a planting. It seems to come up pretty good readily from seed. Foxglove penstemon is one of the common names. Penstemon digitalis. Alright, over here, another one's just coming into flower. I'll go ahead and pluck this one too, just a little easier to see things. You might be able to recognize this one if you've seen mountain mints before. It's got a square stem, opposite leaves. The leaves are really narrow, as we can see here. Flower buds are just starting, so it's not quite yet clear or open. When you're dealing with the mountain mints, you need to look at the stem close up. Helps to have a hand lens. This stem does not have any hairs on it anywhere. That means it's Pycnanthemum tenuifolium, their narrow leaf mountain mint. Another common one that would be found probably a little bit damper sites, again if we're talking about a native prairie, would be Pycnanthemum virginianum, and it would be distinguished by having some hairs on the corners of the stem. Since this is a reconstructed prairie, this is of course one that was selected to be planted, and it is a southern Iowa species. It certainly is a species that is appropriate to be here. One right in front of us here isn't quite yet ready to flower. There's a couple of ramets here, so I can go ahead and pick one up here maybe. This one you can see has compound leaves that have 3 leaflets. They're fairly fuzzy. The stem's pretty fuzzy. And it's going to have some, some flowers here eventually. You can see some very, very immature flower buds up here. This is round-headed bush clover, Vespertisia capitata. All right, let's walk behind the Baptisia here and look at a couple more here. This one right here, I'm kneeling down by. Another one with compound leaves with 3 leaflets. So, like the brown-headed bush clover, this is in the same family, the Fabaceae. Again, still a bit early for flowers. They're starting to come along here at the top. This will continue to grow upwards, and when it actually starts to flower, it'll be a little bit taller than it is now. This one has some reddish streaking on the stem, and then again, looking at these leaflets, 3 leaflets in 1 leaf. This is a showy tick trefoil, Desmodium species. There's a lot of Desmodiums in Iowa, and some of them can get a little difficult, but the 2 that you would find generally on a prairie are this one, Desmodium canadense, showy tick trefoil, or Desmodium illinoisensis, the Illinois tick trefoil. And the 2 are pretty easy to tell apart by looking at the leaf itself. Pull a leaf off and just look at this compound leaf. If the petiole, which is this part of the leaf right here, is shorter than this segment of the compound leaf in here, this is the rachis of the compound leaf, and that's the case pretty much right here. You see this, the petiole again is shorter than this part right in here where my finger is. Then it is Desmodium canadense, showy tick trefoil. The other one would have a much longer petiole. This petiole would be much longer. It would be 3 times or so, maybe more times longer than this section right here. Desmodium illinoisense, or Illinois tick trefoil, also generally is more sticky. It has hairs on the leaves that are curved, and so it's very easy to attach it to your clothing. Now, this one does too. As you see, it somewhat attaches to my shirt here. Not really very well. It's not sticking very well. If this was Illinois tick trefoil, I think it would stick really good. And I shake my shirt a little bit and it just falls off. So it's not quite as good at doing that. Down here in the grass and other forbs is a rigid goldenrod. This plant right here, it's a ways off from flowering, but again, looks like it's probably going to eventually. Rigid goldenrod, Solidago rigida. One of the many goldenrods that you could find out on a prairie. And let's do one more. tall one right here that is finishing up pretty much. These flower beds are closed now, so it's probably pretty much done. This is Ohio spiderwort, Tradescantia ohioensis. You see it has leaves that are grass-like. These are monocot leaves, which of course that's what this is. It's in the group of plants called monocots, so it's related to the grasses, lilies, orchids. There's 3 species of Tradescantia in Iowa, and this one, ohioensis, and another one called bracteata are the ones that are mainly found on prairies. The way to tell them apart is to look at the flower, and especially the sepals. Now, on these flower beds here, the sepals are these green things that are kind of hiding the petals. The petals are really small. Again, as I said, this one is pretty much on the downside as far as flowering goes. But look at these sepals, these green structures here with the hand lens are just close up, and you see that there's no hairs on them. The sepals are glabrous. There's no hairs. Bracteata, the other one, would have very hairy sepals. Here's a good look at white wild indigo. You can see compared to the blue indigo back there, the blue is much more bushy, compact. White wild indigo has a little bit more of maybe a tree-like growth form. It gets tall and branchy. And of course the white flowers. The leaves are pretty similar on each one. They're trifoliate, or what that means is, again, a compound leaf with 3 leaflets. No hairs on any of the plant. None on the leaves, none on the branches, none on the stem. White wild indigo. When this first comes up, and here's a younger shoot coming up here. It's a little bit further along, but when it really just first comes up, and it's just up a few, maybe 6 inches or so, it kind of looks like an asparagus shoot coming up. All right, another one. And again, that's certainly appropriate for here. Here's another one that's appropriate for Johnson County. This is rosinweed, Silphium integrifolium. This would be related to compass plant and to cut plant. It's just got opposite leaves and leaves that are sessile. No leaf stem in there. It'll have a flower that's similar to the compass plant, maybe a little bit smaller. And then in the background over here, one of my favorites, pale purple coneflower, Echinacea pallida. Very hirsute stem. That means very hairy, with kind of stiff hairs. The leaves down here. This is the purple coneflower that would be statewide. This would be a really good example of a poster plant for Iowa prairie, because it would have been found pretty much in the entire state, in every county, out there on the mesic and dry mesic prairies. A couple other species that look similar to this, one that most of you are probably familiar with because many people have it planted in their yard, is Echinacea purpurea. Echinacea purpurea, the purple coneflower, is natively speaking limited to just the southeastern, extreme sort of east central and south central part of Iowa. Yes, it's planted everywhere, unfortunately, in places way outside of its range, but if it was done correctly, it wouldn't have been planted in those places. It would have been just planted in those southeastern portions of the state. The other purple coneflower is western purple coneflower, Echinacea angustifolia, which is found mainly out in the Loess Hills of western Iowa and a few counties a little bit further east in really dry, gravelly prairie. I wanted you to take a look at, and Noah can kind of pan down and see the bare soil that we can see right in through this area. The burn that was done again by the Johnson County crew here. was, as Josh was saying, was really a slow, very complete burn. There's not any litter or thatch left hardly at all here, so really good burn conditions to accomplish that. What happens, of course, right after a burn like that, it's to change the ecology of the prairie is mainly associated with that litter that's been removed. Studies that look at the effects of fire, the best way to do that, of course, is to have a prairie that hasn't been burned for a while, and as Josh said, this one hadn't been burned for quite a while, it seemed like, and so it has a pretty good layer of thatch built up. And then, of course, burn a part of it, and don't burn all of it. Have some plots that are not burned; those are control plots, and then just see again what happens. That's been done many times, of course. And just to kind of summarize, some of the things that you would see there is that because of the fire, especially being done in, I guess it was about April or so, mid-April or so, that's right at the beginning of the growing season. And so that's going to really help increase the warming that's going to happen in the soil. Soil temperatures warm up more quickly as compared to the soil underneath the unburned prairie. And so that just gets things going. That gets the soil warmer, that gets the temperature of the soil up, that gets the roots going. In order for plants to regrow, the roots have to be warm enough to do respiration, and so that warmer soil gets respiration going in the root system and gets the plants going. That warmer soil also stimulates microbial activity from bacteria and fungi to break down organic matter, so there's a more release of nutrients from the organic matter. The amount of fertility or nutrient availability goes up because of that, primarily because of the increased decomposition that's happening because of the warmer soil. There's also more water from precipitation in general that gets into the burn plot than in the unburned plot, because in the unburned plot you might have a layer of litter like that, and think of a layer of litter as mulch. If you've ever mulched your garden, you know that if you mulch your garden, that holds moisture in. That's one reason you do it. It keeps weeds from growing to some extent, but it's also going to intercept rainfall that's coming. So a layer of litter is going to intercept a lot of rain, especially rains that just don't drench the area. So light rains, inch rains or so, something like that. A lot of that rainwater is going to get soaked up by the litter and never makes it down to the soil. So again, research has shown that again, an unburned plot versus a burned plot, at least in terms of spring soil moisture is higher in the plot that was burned. Combined with the increased nutrient availability from decomposition and from the increased warming, and also just increased availability of light because there isn't any thatch, that all helps to stimulate the growth of the prairie plants. That's one important point again to be made, and I'm going back to the sort of the fertilization effect. Because of the stimulation of growth, and again, we don't have an unburned plot here to compare it to. There are some unburned patches around us here, but if we had a plot right next to this area, and especially if you look at it even just a little bit later in the growing season, so you allow more time for that difference to take place, there can be as much as twice as much growth on an area that's been burned versus one that's has not been burned. And again, people look at that and they say, oh, there must have been a fertilization effect from the fire, all that ash. That's sort of a natural conclusion to think that the ash that results from burning the litter has a fertilizer effect. That is not true for prairie. Not true whatsoever. Not true for tallgrass prairie. The fertilizer effect, again, is coming from the enhanced decomposition of organic matter down in the soil. The nutrients that are in the ash, the calcium, magnesium, potassium, and those things that are in the ash, there's already those nutrients down in the soil. The ash is not going to add any significant amount. So the idea of ash having a fertilizer effect, again, is not true for prairies, but it is true for forests. Because if you think about it, a forest and the wood that grows in a forest, that wood locks up nutrients for a long, long, long time. A lot of nutrients can be locked up in a piece of wood. And when a piece of wood burns and the ash that comes from that, now there is a nutrient release. But not in the prairie, because the prairie soil has way more nutrients already in it than what the ash is going to make. All right, I found some purple prairie clover right here in front of me. Good legume for the prairie. One of my favorites as well. Really love the smell of these leaves. I always like to grab a few and crush them and smell them. It has a really nice lemon scent to it. There's two species of pretty common prairie clover in Iowa. They're pretty easy to tell when they're in flower. As you can see, we've got flower inflorescence forming here, but no actual flowers yet. But these will be purple prairie clover. You can tell the difference between it and the other one, white prairie clover, also by the leaves. Clovers have compound leaves with leaflets, just like we saw with the tick trefoil and the bush clovers. The leaflets on purple prairie clover are about half the width that they are on white prairie clover. It would be nice if I had a white prairie clover in this hand and a purple in this hand, you could see that comparison. But if you, after you've kind of seen both of them enough and get that gestalt sense, then it's pretty easy to just look at either one by itself and determine which one you've got. Purple prairie clover. Again, all of these legumes, the clover, the bush clover, the Illinois tick trefoil and showy tick trefoil in the Fabaceae family. Pretty important function all these plants have, of course, in a prairie like this, is that they host rhizobium bacteria in nodules on their roots. And what those rhizobium bacteria are doing is fixing nitrogen, taking nitrogen out of the air and fixing it, which means to put it into an organic compound, which then makes it available for the bacteria to use, but also for the plants to use too. And I was noticing as we were walking through here, I looked down at the soil and I saw some little ant mounds, and this is a really sandy soil in through here. I don't know what the soil series is. I'd have to look it up on a soil map, but it's pretty sandy soil, it looks like. So that's one of the reasons why, if you look at this, again, looking at a general look at the prairie here, it seems like it's only about knee high or so. Well, partly because, again, we're still in the first part of the growing season, but I think also because of the sandy soil, the fertility level, of course, is pretty low, and of course soil moisture might be a problem too. Depends upon how often it rains. Most of this grass that we're seeing in through here, these clumps of grass, most of them look like they're little blue stem, which of course would be a species that would be really well suited to grow in more of a drier, more sandy prairie. We're going to walk down ways a little bit here and show you a butterfly milkweed. Here's some of that soil. So there's a bit of sand in here and there's a bit of silt. Probably windblown sand. Alright, here's the butterfly milkweed. Actually, it's right next to a purple prairie clover. We could have just started here, I guess. One of the most gorgeous prairie plants, in my thinking. Butterfly milkweed right here. You don't see many plants on the prairie with that color of petals. Wood lily sometimes has a color a little bit like that, but it's sort of butterfly milkweed's own color. So again, one of the really important milkweeds is 18 species of milkweed that grow in Iowa, and almost all of them, probably about 15 of them or so, grow on prairies. This is a one that is different from the other milkweeds in a couple ways, and one is that when you tear a leaf off, there's no milk. There's a little bit of liquid, there's some sap there, but it's clear. So you will not see the characteristic milky latex that you would normally see when you pull a leaf off of a milkweed plant. The other one is that most milkweeds are generally opposite. Now that can vary a little bit, but the leaves are opposite. On butterfly milkweed, they're not at all. You see one here, one here, one here, one here, one here. The leaves are alternate. All right, nice plant. And there's quite a few of them spread out over the prairie here. We can kind of start picking them up here by looking across and seeing those splashes of red. Then the last one we're going to look at here is over here, and this is, I think it's really a great find on a reconstructed prairie. This is lead plant. If you plant lead plant in a reconstruction, you are indeed, going for the long term, because it usually takes several years for this plant to establish and get to this point where this one's going to flower in another week, probably. Lead plant is a part herbaceous, part woody plant. You can see here some woody stems here from before the burn, when the plant actually had been growing for several years without a burn and was starting to develop more of a shrub growth form. After a burn like this, it of course regrows from the root system, and all of this growth right now is more herbaceous. But again, over time, what will happen is the plant will develop a little more and more woody texture or woody tissue towards the base of the plant. I have seen lead plant on some prairies that is taller than me. Lead plant shouldn't ever probably get that tall. It's a good sign that that prairie hasn't been burned nearly as much as it should. Lead plant, another legume with lots and lots and lots of leaflets. We've been looking at plants that had 3 or 5 leaflets before. This one's got, gosh, I don't know, probably about 40 leaflets there, 30 to 40 there, all on one leaf. And of course, it gets its name, lead plant, from the grayish green look that the plant takes on, especially the underside of the leaves. You kind of see that grayish green look. It looks a little bit like a lead color. That comes from the hairs, from the pubescents that are pretty thick, especially on the bottom side of the leaf. There's some on the top side, but not quite as many. This looks a little greener than the bottom. And those hairs are there for a number of reasons. One of them might be to help thwart insects or bugs that might try to attack the leaf. A small little tiny bug down in the hairs on this leaf, it'd be the same as us walking through a dense thicket of shrubs. Another thing that hairs do, especially on the top surface, is it helps to reflect solar radiation and lessen the amount of warming, the amount of energy that the leaf absorbs, so the leaf doesn't get as hot as it otherwise would. Lead plant, and again, as I said, it can take several years for lead plant to really show up, especially get to this stage. On reconstructions I've studied and worked on, I've seen it, as a little seedling coming up about the 3rd or 4th year after the planting, and then it takes another several years for it to get to a nice big plant like this. So we kind of think of lead plant as sort of a late successional species. This suggests to me again that this planting was done quite a while ago. We don't know for sure when it was done, but if lead plant is this size, it must have been done, I bet, at least 10 or 12 years ago. Probably more.
So one of the reasons why we're doing what we do at the City of Iowa City is burning is such an important tool for us, because when we don't burn, we have an instance like we have behind us right now, where we have invasives coming, autumn olive, honeysuckle, bird's foot trefoil. You can see the level of cedar coming in here as well, the dogwoods. You can see the progression of the prairie is actually going away. And we need the tool for fire to be able to help. There is plants still in here You can see them from the original planting, but you can see that they're starting to get masked by everything that we don't want. So, Dr. Ross was talking about grasses in the thatch layer. Look how thick this is. It's so thick, it's got a moss growing underneath of it at this point.
Wow.
It's not allowing things to grow. Yeah, so we're in Lower City Park on one of Iowa City's oldest parks. This is at 200 Park Road. We're approximately 100 yards from Iowa River. And this is a planting that we did. It's on its year 2. Planting. It was planted in 2020. This was an area where it used to be a green space, mowed turf. There was baseball diamonds in a portion of this and an old road bed that actually ran through this area here. It was an area that was vulnerable for flooding. It was an area that we always seemed to keep coming back to, pouring a lot of money into all the time, and it just was green space. We needed to try to figure out a way to be more sustainable, so we started to transition these areas. Not taking away from a park, but adding aesthetic value, a different dimension for people to be able to utilize a park space. So this is kind of what we came up with. It's a very diverse mix. It's not going to be as pretty as you would see what we just came from on an established prairie with a fresh burn. This one has not been burned. It did not have enough material to push a fire through this spring. We are hoping to do maybe a fall burn on this, if not an early spring burn on this location, and I think it'll make a vast change. Last year you used to see a lot of black-eyed Susan, partridge pea, kind of your newly seeded plants that you would see. So we're kind of waiting to see what this spring is going to bring. I do see some plants starting to peek through here, but there is also some undesirables in here that I'm hoping we can control with fire in a different dimension, just timing on how we do it.
So this is a pretty big contrast to the other side over there, which is, we were guessing maybe is almost 20 years old, could be almost 20 years old. This one just being in a second growing season. If you're thinking about doing reconstructions anywhere, you have to understand that this is typical for the first few years. You have to have some patience. It's going to take some while to transition from whatever there was to what you planted. We can see there are, Josh mentioned some holdovers. There's quack grass here. This grass that we see right here is a common lawn grass, forage grass, quack grass. If he's looking down through the other herbaceous plants in here, we can see dandelions, and we can see white clover. These are all some of the plants, I'm sure, that were present in that turf grass. There's some Kentucky bluegrass over here to my left. So, you know, it seems like you never really get a complete full kill on those perennial species that could be present on a site that you're going to plant prairie on. I will say that, you know, you can probably increase your chances if you take 2 years to try to prepare the site and, you know, do a herbicide application and then just follow it for another year and see what comes back, because generally something will come back. It won't be a complete kill, and you give yourself an extra 6 months or something to try to get rid of everything that's there before you actually put seed out. The one advantage of that is that the cleaner it is, in terms of, again, removing the undesirables, the previous plants, when you put your seed out, then of course the better off you are, because holdovers like this, just again, it gets a little bit harder to deal with them. I think you know, using fire, as Josh suggested, will probably help when they're able to start getting this burned, when they have enough fuel. It looks like there's not a lot of native grass yet. There is some wild Canada rye coming up. That's one thing you need to have, of course, to carry a fire, is some of those fine fuels. So that's where the grasses come in. Some of this quack grass will probably help with that. What do we have here that was planted? Well, you can see it's a yellow, or excuse me, it's a sea of white, basically. That's all yarrow that we see here in bloom. Achillea millefolium. Yarrow is one of these plants that, again, it's a little bit of a conundrum how to think about it. I think the current thinking and understanding is that we may have a couple of different subspecies, one of them being native to North America, and one that was native to Europe. I don't know that you can tell them apart that easily, but that's what I've read. Here's some wild bergamot. We did see some of that at the other site. This is a plant that will establish pretty well as well. Looks like the yarrow has done pretty well, of course. I see some yellow sticking its head up over there. Those look like those are ox eyes. Heliopsis helianthoides. Walk over. Oh, well, here's a plant right here. It's not in flower, but this is another pretty good early successional species. Again, there's usually a sort of a suite of species in that planting that do establish pretty good those first year or two. Those are the sort of the first wave of prairie plants, those early successional species. Another one would be black-eyed Susan. I saw some of that too earlier as we were walking in here. Another one would be gray-headed coneflower if that's been planted. Here's some, well, let's see what this is. Let me get a little closer here. This looks like it could be sweet coneflower, Rudbeckia subtomentosa. There's a flower of oxeye or false sunflowers, another name for that. Here's some of that gray-headed coneflower right here. Oh, and here's some golden Alexander. This would be a great species for a site that gets wet. Golden Alexander is a good wet music prairie species. This one is in fruit right now. Well, looks like a Canada wild rye here, maybe. Though I don't think so. Just not quite showing its characteristic openness yet, because it's still kind of tightly closed in. What else? Other weedy things, again dealing with horseweed. That's a native species, but pretty weedy. Oh, here's a black-eyed Susan. That's going to be flowering pretty soon. Rudbeckia hirta. Oh, look over here. There is some sneezeweed. Sneezeweed. This is again a good species for a wet music site on a floodplain. The Iowa River is just right over there, so we're on this floodplain. This one here is prickly lettuce. It's not native. It's something that you want to minimize if you can, but this is what prickly lettuce looks like. Lactuca cereola.
So one of the challenges we run into with burning within the city limits is, there's a multitude of issues that we run into. One of them being, obviously winning the hearts of your fire department over. Making them understand that we're doing good and not causing harm. Secondly, it's the public. It's a public eye. It's a bad persona. We have fire departments. Why are we lighting fires? So by doing that, it is helping us to make these prairies better, more healthier, help them sustain themselves. One of the big issues we also run into is smoke management. And you look around and you see what we have around here, and all you see is buildings, people, We have a river to my left and a highway right there with a multi-level structured building. You can see the thing that's on the top of the roof of that right there is a HVAC system. If I put smoke into that building, we are going to get a phone call. So it's one of the troubles we run into when we plant these areas. We have to think about how are we going to manage these? How are we going to put a fire through them? Where are we going to put the smoke when we do burn? So in an instance like a location right here, we may come and visit this spot 3-4 times in different weather conditions and try a spot burn. Do a test burn to see what that smoke is going to do. When we burn next to highways and rivers and water bodies, they create their own winds, totally different than what we're used to doing on a normal open area site. So we may come here, like I say, 2, 3, 4 times, do a small test burn and see what this smoke is going to do before we finally write that prescription and say, this is what we're going to do. On an area like we're at right here, it's a good thing we own a very large expanse of property to my right, so we would try to push this smoke back into the park and let it dissipate over this rather than over the river, over a roadway, or next to structures. But it's one of the tools we have to think about, one of the things we have to do before we plant an area. How can we manage it? Is this an area that can be burnt? Is this an area that just needs to be mechanically removed? It's just one of the keys we have to use, or pieces we have to use as we think about putting prairie in. So we're at an area by our park shop. This would be at 2275 South Gilbert Street. This is our main parks facility. This is an area that we planted, it's on its 3rd year. This was a road bank that we used to mow. It was turf grass. This was another sustainable area. Do we really need it? So we went in and we herbicidally treated this area 2 times and then seeded it down into a prairie mix, heavy in forbs, to try to sustain the pollinators, yet be able to sell to the public that prairie is a good thing. And it can be desirable while being here. So we're sitting next to one of our probably 4 major roads, Gilbert Street, going down through Iowa City, heavily trafficked. We also have our softball complex next door, a major bicycle pet trail. The Iowa River Trail runs right next to it as well. So we wanted to make sure that it was very showy and people could definitely enjoy it. So a lot of different species in here. This piece here has not been burned either. We tried to burn it this spring, but struggled with just enough material to burn. But I think after this year, I think this will be an area that'll go pretty quick for us. So, and we'll see definitely a large jump in growth and in species next year once we do get it burned. So, all right. So one of the things we're going to talk about is burning and kind of things to consider. This location is very unique. One of the big issues here is the proximity of the road, but yet the proximity of high voltage lines. It is something you need to consider when doing a planting such as this. In this case right here, we have 2 targets, or 3 targets that we need to worry about. 4 to be honest. We have the roadway and driving smoke and fire onto there, the close proximity. 2, the high voltage lines and the proximity of the degree, how high they are above. Anytime you burn next to electricity, you need to worry about putting smoke in because it can cause that power to come back down onto the top of you. Another issue is they're wood poles, they're not metal poles. So we have to make sure we mow around them before we burn. We make sure we burn off around them first so there's no chance of them getting close to it. And then we also have the target of the building being right next door. So it's something we have to take into consideration while we burn. On a case like this, we wouldn't burn on a strong wind day, but we would not burn on a no wind day. We'd have to have that subtle 10-mile-an-hour wind to drive that smoke away from here and keep it out of the power lines, yet off the buildings. It's just something that you need to pay attention to when you do a burn or when you plant a prairie. How are you going to manage it? Where are you going to put that smoke if there is fire? Where are you going to put that fire? How are you going to light that fire? In the case here, we have a severe slope. You also have to think about, if I light at the bottom of this hill with the wind blowing that direction, it's going to be at the top of the hill faster than you can walk to it. If we light at the top, we need enough wind to push the smoke away from it going that direction. So it's just things you need to play around with when you plant something like this. Work with your fire department, do some spot burns, see how to write that prescription so that way it can't go wrong. It's just one of the tools you'll need to do as you establish a prairie and maintain it throughout its life.
How often do you do spot birds before?
Sometimes 2 to
Doing
3
it.
times. We'll come out in different prescriptions, different wind directions, different temperatures, timing of the day. That is a big one as well. On a case here, we would probably burn this in the morning time. We would not burn it in late in the afternoon when the RH is low. I don't want volatility in this area because there's too many targets. So we may lean towards burning earlier in the morning, earlier or mid-morning when the RH is a little bit higher, when it's a little bit more controllable. If we waited to a time of the day like we're at right now after 4 o'clock, this would be extremely volatile, and it'd be very hard to control and do what you want it to do. So timing of the day is a huge thing, and that's a thing we do as we're trying to write a prescription. When do we want to burn this piece? This is exposed to the sun, it is exposed to wind, it does dry out very fast. So this is an area that we would probably be first of the day. This would be the first one we'd go to and burn rather than the last one.
So a 3-year-old planting here is, it's got another year as opposed to the site we were just at City Park. But again, early stages of the planting, early successional species are going to be a predominant feature here. A lot of those are going to be fairly weedy species again. The idea really in terms of plant ecology and how the progression of a planting goes is that the more time you give it, again, the more time it allows then for those perennial species which you've planted, the prairie species that you're trying to get started, to get to the point where they can start competing against a lot of these early weeds. So among all the early weeds, again, we have this prickly lettuce we saw at the other site here, fair amount of that right in through here. This thing it's gone completely to seed now, and these are the fruits. This is pennycress, it's a mustard. There's some English plantain. That's this right here with these leaves. Fairly long, elongate leaves. These are the flowers. English plantain. Horseweed. Again, this is a native one, but kind of still fits that role of being early successional weedy species. Here's some Creeping Charlie down in through here, ground cover. The purple flowers there. And I think again, as fire is used, fire will be very helpful in pushing back on a lot of these species. There's some more of that English plantain. The big one right there with the huge, rhubarb-like leaves is burdock. That one is a biennial, and it's going to be producing flowers this year, trying to at least. Of course, that's one thing that mowing does. One of the reasons for mowing these early stage prairie plantings is that you're going to have species like this and other annual species that their goal is to grow, produce seed, and then they die. Well, the best strategy to combat them is to don't let them go to seed. If you can do anything, don't let them go to seed, because that's just less seed they're going to have to deal with. And annuals and biennials have to produce seed in order to persist on a site. They always are going to be coming from seed. They don't come from roots. So that's one of the reasons for mowing several times during the year, the first couple years. This grass that's right in through here, you see the drooping spikelets here. This is Japanese brome, a cool season annual species. Here too, mowing would probably help lessen its ability to persist here. And maybe the last one here, it looks like another biennial curly sourdock. The leaves are pretty distinctive on this, as if you recognize it at least as a sourdock species, but then the sort of the crisp or curly margins, as they're described, again, is a good identifying feature for curly sourdock. Well, let's see what's established from the prairie seeding. And the first one is this nice penstemon. We saw this on the first prairie. Here's another nice plant, Penstemon digitalis, foxglove beard tongue. This one has a sedge that was no doubt planted. Right here, I look at the spikes here. These are spikes. This is where the female flowers are located, and of course then where the fruits are going to be inside these perigynia. I looked at these with my hand lens close up, and it looks like this is Carex breviar, a native sedge. It's more bergamot, black-eyed Susans. Again, good examples of some of these early successional species that take off pretty well at the beginning of a planting. Again, oxeye or false sunflower, Heliopsis helianthoides. Again, gray-headed coneflower, Cucurbita pinnata. Here's one that we haven't seen yet, or at least haven't identified. Probably has been out there. This is heath aster, Symphyotrichum ericoides. Late summer, fall blooming white aster, small white flowers. You can see here there's not nearly as much as on the previous side of the yarrow. Maybe there wasn't quite as much seeded. Maybe it's because the yarrow is starting to kind of fade out a little bit. Hard to say for sure. But I wanted to make our way over to this one. So this is a great one to see in a planting already in its third year. Compass plant. And it's really doing its thing pretty well there. Orienting its leaf edges north and south, face of the leaves, top and bottom sides of the leaves, east and west. That's a strategy it uses to help maximize photosynthesis and minimize water loss first thing in the morning. Best time to do photosynthesis for a plant.
The bottom of the leaves always pointing in the same direction, and the top
so
for the east and west.
The word compass, of course, implies that something must be going on with direction, right? So it gets its name because the lobes of the leaves, I guess that's probably a better way of thinking about it. These lobes are pointing north and south here. The face, or the bottom and top of the leaf, are pointing towards this one toward the west, this one towards the east. And this leaf is doing it pretty well. This leaf is doing it pretty well. This leaf is not quite as true, certainly not true north and south, but not every leaf will be. The point is that if you look at enough of the leaves of compass plant and keep track of everything, you will see that leaves are oriented in this way, with the lobes again north and south, generally north and south direction, certainly much more often than they would be if it was just random. I mean, if you look at 100 leaves and you orient it to maybe like 8 or 16 different directions, then it would just be a random thing. The number that are north and south should be equal to all the other possibilities. They all would have the same probability, whatever orientations you want to look at. But research has shown that north-south orientation occurs much, much more often than it would be if it was a random thing. Here's one that I did see at the floodplain forest, the last stop Also see it here too. This is New England aster. So New England aster is a later season bloomer. Probably August it'll be in bloom. It's a pretty easy one to recognize vegetatively. If you can see at the base of the leaves, pull that one out of the way. So here is a leaf right here. If we go down to the base of it and turn it so we can see two little lobes, or auricles as they're called, little lobes that extend off the base of the leaf and sort of semi-hug the stem. They don't go completely around the stem, so they don't touch, but they kind of enclose or wrap around the stem just a little bit. New England aster has really deep bluish, purplish flowers. It's a real beauty when it's in bloom. Here's one that could have been planted, or I suppose it could also have come in maybe on its own, a resident species, so to speak. This is giant goldenrod. Smooth stem is a good characteristic for it. Glabrous, smooth stem. Glabrous means there's no hairs anywhere. Smooth looking giant goldenrod. Solidago gigantea.